Hello, my name is Mark Eastburn. I'm outdoors in my backyard in Levittown, Pennsylvania. This is kind of an opportunity. I wanted to show you ways that you could utilize the enhanced ebooks that I've written, as well as some other books, to get an idea of what activities you might be able to do during this time when everyone's pretty much staying indoors. It seems like every video I've seen up to this point from anyone has been inside their living room or their kitchen or wherever. I want to get one at least from a backyard. Now, even if you are in a serious quarantine type situation, we should be able to get outside a little bit. We do know that for children and for adults, any sort of outdoor exposure is very healthy and very good for mental well-being as well as physical well-being if you can get some exercise. I'm hoping this will provide an opportunity for teachers and students and parents to really start focusing on the wildlife that we have around us. This is related to my books, Home is Where My Habitat Is, as well as Are They the Same? It'll also apply to some of the other ebooks that are available through the NSTA. Now for today's particular activity, I just wanted to take a look a little bit, take a little mini safari of my backyard. I will also do some investigations in more rural areas and some urban areas to see what sorts of things the teachers could empower their students to investigate, or teachers could just go around themselves and look for so that their students may have an engagement with the natural world without actually having to go outdoors if their parents would choose not to, or if just for safety reasons. Now, speaking on the subject of safety, I do have sunblock on, I do have tick repellent on, I have gloves. These are all good ideas for both parents and teachers and students to follow. So I would definitely recommend that students not investigate these things on their own, but be in presence of a parent or a teacher or someone who is an adult who can make the safe decisions on what they can pick up, what they can touch, what they can't touch. We don't want kids getting ticks. We don't want kids getting poison ivy. There's some areas of the country where we do have poisonous snakes. A lot of harmless snakes also, so we don't need to start throwing rocks at the snakes, but there are some dangerous animals that we need to be aware of also. Now, in my particular location in Pennsylvania and in New Jersey, where I'll also be, there's really not a lot of worrisome animals that one would come in contact with, but just for other areas of the country, just so that you're aware. Now, I will admit that my backyard is something of a mess at the moment. I do have some wood, I have some blocks. I was actually planning on renovating all of my backyard before this crisis hit, and I guess I probably will have some free time to do that in the coming weeks. But I just wanted to show you some of the things you might be able to find right here. Opportunities for data collection, either for the teacher to run this on their own outside in their own backyard if they have one. I'll also show some in local natural areas or parks or even blacktops where you could potentially find some evidence of nature. So data collection activities focus on local species. I just realized my glove is ripped and I'm gonna have to go get a new one. But this is an opportunity for students to really start to become familiar with the wildlife that's around them. A lot of science units focus on nature in other parts of the country, nature in other parts of the world, but really there's a lot to discover right here in our own backyards, or in local parks, or in other areas where apartment complexes, other areas where people might be living, because I understand that not everyone lives in the same place. Some people live on farms. There's plenty of find to there as well. So we'll see what we can find right here, and I'll try to bring this also to some other locations. While I run inside to get some new equipment, I wanted to point out that these activities are going to help teachers meet certain specific learning standards. These are two that are available through the Next Generation Science Standards, in addition to science and engineering practices and cross-cutting concepts, which are also part of NGSS. These activities may also be adapted to other science standards, which I'm sure you'll be able to find by looking at your state's website or ngss.org. Now, when I just went inside to get a new glove, I also grabbed a plastic food container I got at the dollar store. I'm gonna see what I can find here and show people how to make a mini habitat. This is something the teacher might want to do, give some updates each day on how their little creatures are doing. It might also be an opportunity for kids to make their own, again, with the supervision of an adult, with gloves, with sunscreen, with bug repellent, with other protective equipment. It depends on what part of the country you're living in. Right here in Pennsylvania, it's already tick season. New Jersey, it is too. That's something we definitely don't want to be exposing anyone to while they're out there experiencing nature. Here we have an old piece of wood next to my pitcher plants, which have been growing here for a couple of years. And again, scattered rocks. Most people might have something like this they can find nearby. and if I take a look under, I see we have centipedes, which you would not want to pick up. We also have the isopods, which is what I'm looking for. So isopods are crustaceans, which means they're related to shrimp, they're related to crabs, lobsters. Let me collect a couple. They're very abundant. Very interesting little creatures. I'll explain more about them. Here we have a millipede. Millipedes can sometimes make secretions that are irritating to people, so I would not recommend picking up the millipede. Here we have a different species of isopod. I'll try to highlight species that I've found in my backyard. You may find them also. Interesting thing about isopods is that most of the species we find came from England. They came with the settlers. No one was really paying attention back in those days, and they've kind of taken over from any native species that might have been living here previously. You see, I have some, it's springtime, so I have some plants starting to come up, some flowers. Isopods are completely harmless. However, if somebody does have a shellfish allergy, it certainly would be recommended that they use some protective equipment like gloves to handle them. They can't bite though, they can't sting. There's no harm they can cause. These are one of my favorite animals to work with. Ooh, here we have a huge collection of several different species. These are Porcellio scaber. The other ones I collected were Armadillidium nasatum. I'll get some good pictures. And this would be a great opportunity for students to understand a little bit of the biodiversity right in their local habitat. So I already have 3 species of isopod in here. I'll take pictures. I'll hopefully make it a little clear which species are which, and maybe we can help. You can help students compile some lists of the isopod species they might find in their own yards. Now this is very early spring in my area. There's an Armadillidium nasatum, but you can still find living things out and about. Now, interestingly, right here I have Porcellio scaber, and then I have Armadillidium nasatum, both living in little small communities right there under the same stone. I'm going to collect a few, and I'll show how to set up a little habitat for them, which a teacher might want to do and update students on how everyone's doing, where everyone is living inside the habitat, or students might want to do something like this on their own. Here I am in a much more rural area, which you can see not a lot of habitations around me. Now, this is somewhere you might not want to encourage students to go by themselves, of course, but certainly with an adult. It's very good to get outdoors, and it's very good to see what we can find in these sorts of locations as well. You might find that the isopods are quite a bit less abundant in wild areas. And here we have another species of isopod. This one's called Aniscus ocellus. It's also from Europe originally. Here I'm in a green area in Trenton, New Jersey to see what sorts of things I might be able to find in a small city park right behind me. Here we have some Armadillidium vulgare. And there we have a beautiful jumping spider. That's called Phidippus audax. Once she feels safe, she'll go back into her sling, which that is called, that shelter. My collection container was a little bit too small for an actual decent isopod habitat, but here I have a Sterlite 6-quart container. That's probably about the minimum size for something if you want to actually set up a habitat for these isopods. That would be my recommended size. Now, under perfect conditions, we would want something like Eco Earth, which is something you can buy at the pet store, or some sort of a more of a sterile sort of a substrate. Soil will work fine. It's not necessarily the ideal, although as you can see, the isopods were doing perfectly fine outdoors in regular soil. So I'm actually just going to grab from last year's garden and grab some soil. Might actually find some isopods still hiding in the soil. We want to have it nice and aerated because we don't want fungus growing inside here. Now that's not nearly enough yet. Let me go down to where I collected my isopods. I should be able to find a little bit more bare soil. Not exactly the loosest type of soil here. You could also use a trowel or a small shovel to pull up the soil. This soil might be a little bit too thick. I'll go back to where I was. Now here are some worm castings. That, you know, is some good soil because worms have already gone through it and they've pooped out some of the nutrients, which makes this soil probably a good choice. I'm going for a depth of about an inch, 2.5 centimeters. And to confirm, the substrate is almost 2 inches deep, or 5 centimeters. That should be good. What we want is we actually want that humidity to be building up so that the isopods can feel safe. Now from there, I have a nice cover. You can see some isopods have already found a home there, so they need some covering. Leaves also work very well. They will eat the leaves. Oftentimes you'll find them skeletonized. Now the goal, skeletonized, where all of this in-between stuff has been eaten away and there's only the veins left. You may see leaves that get skeletonized like that. Now you don't want to be too thick with the leaf layer because if it gets piled up too high, your isopods will actually be able to climb out. The nice thing about isopods, in addition to the fact that they can be handled with appropriate precautions and the fact that they don't bite or sting, another advantage to isopods is that they can't climb the surface of this container. However, if you give them a little bridge, they will actually climb right out. I'm going to look for my moss. There's my moss, which again, a lot of isopods appear to be enjoying. They will eat the moss. I'll get rid of some of these leaves. The isopod should still be on the bottom. And it looks like I still have quite a few, so I will put them in. And for an isopod habitat, that's really all they need. I wouldn't recommend covering this, only because mold can build up. It can get too humid, and mold can actually be dangerous for isopods. Also can be dangerous for a person who happens to be breathing this stuff in. Probably the best idea would be to leave this outdoors. If you do want to bring it indoors, just be careful, make sure it doesn't dry out too quickly. Also make sure it doesn't get too wet. What I would do is I would take a spray bottle maybe 2 times a week and spray, especially under the shelter here where I already have some isopods hiding. One additional item that will benefit your isopods is a piece of cuttlebone, which I have here. It could be any other calcium source. It could be a piece of chalk. It could also be an eggshell from a hard-boiled egg. They actually do congregate around cement because cement does contain calcium as well. So that is why you'll oftentimes find isopods in an area where there is quite a bit of concrete, because they actually prefer those areas where they're able to get a nice source of calcium. So I have my cuttle bone there. You might also want to put, as I said, a piece of hard-boiled eggshell. That'll be an excellent source of calcium for the isopods. And really, that's all you need. Here we have a beautiful, low-budget habitat that students might be able to make on their own, or the teacher could certainly have students check on each day. They could make a video. This is a little habitat that students might be able to make on their own, or the teacher could make one and report on how the isopods are doing from one day to another. It's another way of helping connect people with the outdoors near them. Isopods live pretty much anywhere in North America. You can find them. You can pretty much find these particular species anywhere in North America. So it's definitely a way of tying together different parts of the country with a similar species, which wasn't actually native to this continent before the settlers arrived. Now I'll show you some cool stuff you can do with the isopods, and maybe also encourage your students to try under adult supervision. Now, something you'll notice about these isopods is that the Armadillidium nasatum, the Armadillidium vulgare, will roll up into a ball, while Porcellus scaber will not. Porcellus scaber will lay flat. So what I would encourage either the teacher or the students to do, see how fast each of them moves. This is a way of collecting data. Now, this is not a perfect circle by any means, but I've just taken a piece of paper, I'm drawing. So if I put the isopod here, for example, it's going to run about 4 centimeters. I was right about that. But just to get an idea, which kind of isopod might move faster? The Armadillidium vulgare, or the Armadillidium nasatum, which can roll up into a ball, have an added advantage as far as how they can escape from danger. Now, today is fairly cool, but if I put the Porcellus scaber, this is the one that cannot roll up, you can see how fast it might move. You can see when I pick it up, when I move it, it will not roll up into a ball. Now, either the teacher could set this up on her own, or students could do this under the supervision of an adult. Or, I mean, when we do get back to school, teacher could put this under a document camera if one happens to be available, and see what they might be able to learn. Now again, this 4 centimeters is a completely arbitrary number. It just so happens that's what fits on my iPad screen at the moment. Now, if I get my phone with the time and start to determine how fast it takes for each of these isopods to cover this distance. And again, is there a reason why the flatter isopods move a certain speed, whereas the ones that roll up move a different speed? So I will let this one start, and that one took, that was a little fast. It's an Armadillidium nasatum. So he's a much slower mover.